I hope you like the new book. I
Oh my
thought you'd
God.
appreciate it.
I really,
I thought you know,
it's
I thought
awesome.
you of all people would kind of get it. So
I mean, does anybody not get it?
no, that's the thing. I have gotten an insane amount of messages, and everyone is like, "This is so unique. This is so different. This isn't what I was thinking. This is so cool. Yeah." So I'm stoked. Yeah, I was like, right on. Yeah. So that at least they're so far, but you never know. You have to put
That's
something
true.
out. You just never know.
I
So
feel like that as a writer, like I never have any idea.
you never know. Yeah, yeah. I never have any idea. Yeah. So I'm always like, but so far everyone has been like, this is really cool. I really dig it. So that's awesome.
It's amazing. I can't tell you how much I love this book. Um, yeah, it's really special, I think.
Because
So,
I wrote it in this special way for a special purpose, for a special reading. So I'm glad you appreciate that. So we can
yeah,
talk about that for sure. Yeah.
it's just amazing. So, yeah, it kind of touched me in a way that like most books just can't do or
Oh,
don't even
cool.
try to do, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Yeah,
so
yeah.
I think you
That's good to
really
hear.
kind of achieved something beyond the norm with this book and even like beyond what you've written in other books. It's like
Oh, that makes me so happy to hear that. Thank you.
yeah, because it takes it to a level where you're engaging the reader in the practice. And it's
Yeah.
not complex, but
Right.
it's so sincere that it can't not work.
Okay, that's beautiful. I love that.
Yeah. I mean,
Because
that's
I
how I
love
felt.
no, I love that. I mean, I love complex stuff, but that's just it's so few that can get that. Um, so there has to be other ways we can transmit and communicate things that have to be just as powerful, not like it's good and then crappy, It has to be good and good, just different wavelengths,
Right. Yeah, I
Kind
feel
of like
that.
music. It's like music. It's all about this. This is like honestly, this is like I can imagine every time I write, I imagine I'm playing music, and this is like this kind of like very minimalist music, and no one would listen to the solos or the writing on Dark Side of the Moon and go, that's not complex. That's kind of simple. You'd be like, whoa, that's simple, but there's something there that I
Yeah.
can go back to. I can go back to that. I can go back to that. I can go back to that. That's what I was thinking. So
Yeah. It was amazing.
anyway,
So, Desert Meditations, Gnostic Cartography, a handbook of Agni Yoga. I mean, even the title is just amazing, I think.
I was hoping the title would kind of chart the way for people to kind of like have a compass for what they could uncover within the text.
I have to ask you, like, when you set out to write the book, like, I'm curious of what your intention was in trying to like affect your readers because I can feel it from
Hmm.
your words, but I'm curious if you can talk about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I I I feel very strongly that writing can be a magical practice. Obviously, that's something that's not a novel idea. I mean, I remember as a as a kid reading William Burroughs, and even someone as quote mainstream as William Burroughs would talk of it that way. But I think that there is a way that we can write that can transmit something that is beyond the words on the page. That it can create a certain atmosphere which can, if maybe read in a certain mind space or read in a certain environment, can almost have a different layer to it. And then that layer can stimulate different layers within the reader's consciousness because, there might be an idea or a seed within a writing, but then I want it to resonate with the unique capacity and the unique wavelength of the reader. And that's always so unique. Every person has something very unique that they can experience that is, whether we want to say it's part of it, it's on their unique spiritual pilgrimage, their unique spiritual journey, or their own personal relationship to their perception of that. And so I, in particular, with this book, I really wanted that. I mean, I was thinking that way in Entering the Desert, absolutely,
Right.
without a doubt. But then I wanted this to go maybe to a different level, where the person could have some type of handbook almost that they could take around and travel with, and then regardless of what their particular tradition was, they could have these prayers, a type of lectio divina, a type of meditative reading, which would maybe kind of light a spark in their own consciousness, their own awareness, and then they could follow that spark. They could follow their own unique path. That was what I was hoping for, with that.
Yeah, I definitely got that sense. And I mean, I'm not, it feels wrong to admit it after you just said this, but like I carried the book around with me for probably
Right.
2 months,
Oh, that's
taking it
wonderful.
out, looking at it pretty much daily. And I found like a strong resonance with like everything that was like happening in my life at the moment, like this
Oh,
idea of like sacrificing into the flame. And
yes.
I can remember even it was so, it kind of like blew my mind a little bit, but he does that all the time. Like my teacher was like, when he gave this teaching, like like right after I read your book, and he's like talking about the fire offering and like the
Yeah.
formal, like actual practice and like offering it all into it. And he's like this,
Yeah.
and he's like trying to like get us to see how this is no different than the sacrifice of attention in meditation practice or in work or in life in general. And kind of like, this is what we're always offering this up again and again and again, because it's the only way to do this. The path works, but you have to work it all the time.
Right. Right. Now that's beautiful. Yeah. That was my hope. That's why I really wanted, I wrote this book as a flame. I wanted that to be this type of thing that it could ignite that inner Agni. And the idea of Agni yoga, that transcends any sectarian differences, any differences. It goes to the deepest primordial level of this inner flame that exists within all humanity, all sentient beings, and all of matter, and then all of everything. So it resonates there. So the fire altar, the fire sacrifice is a very important example of that, without a doubt.
Yeah, I found especially resonant this idea of the pilgrimage, this sacred pilgrimage that you write about.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. That I'm glad you felt that. That is very important. That chapter, this idea of our life is a type of pilgrimage. Our
Yes.
incarnation, our incarnation is this rare, embodiment that we have in this, you know, time and space. We get that it exists on multiple dimensions of time. There's different time streams in our life, which can be reflective of how we unfold karma in our lives. There's an element of digestion of that too, is almost how we can digest our karma is very unique as well too. But this idea of a pilgrimage is, there's different levels of our realities in our life. We could use something very basic and say, we have a mundane life, but then there's also a spiritual life, and then oftentimes people really separate those, right? They're completely separate, but they should be these things are intimately intermingled. It's kind of like, in Chinese medicine, we say when something's very hard to treat, it's as if oil and flour are mixed together. They're almost inseparable. That's how our spiritual practice should be with our mundane life, but that's often hidden for many people. So we have this perception of an idea of this discovery, but it's always there. It's just we can't see it, we can't hear it, we can't taste it. And so there's these, spiritual traditions offer us a lot of tools for us to kind of uncover that, or kind of like excavate that, a type of, digging around and what we perceive that. And so I think that idea of a pilgrimage, it really is that our incarnation is a type of pilgrimage. And then where are we going? Right? We have, what are we searching for? How do we set our compass? And then, how do we kind of navigate that? We have all these inner maps that we're born with, but oftentimes we just can't see them.
Yeah, it's really interesting, because when I think about life as a pilgrimage, it does cause an automatic kind of like, well, where are we going?
Yeah.
What's the destination? Yeah. And how do we get there?
Yeah. Yeah. And that is huge. And oftentimes the question itself creates an orientation. We have to just get someone to ask that question. Other times, people can get so caught up into the destination that they miss the life, right?
Yeah.
So there's these different it's on a very nuanced understanding of what that means. But if we really truly know, if we have a certain knowing where we know our life is a sacred pilgrimage, it gives us a certain type of shraddha or faith, and it gives us a certain type of resilience to see all the things we experience in life as a type of spiritual sadhana. Whether it's suffering or grief or all the human emotions that we will experience in life, we don't have to run away from those. We just accept those for what they are. And then there's an alchemy in that. We can extract that, but to extract that, we have to have that Agni. And so that's kind of where this concept of Agni Yoga is essentially just about our ability to digest our karma, our ability to digest our life, and then our ability. There's a very interesting connection between Agni and vision. We think about it because it's light. And so it gives us a vision of something. So it also lets us be able to see where we're going, to see what's happening. And that's like, you can think of Maya as a type of fog or something which is occluding our vision, and Agni clears that away, just like the solar, idea, the sun clearing away the clouds or clearing away the darkness. If we can awaken that inner light, then we can not only see where we're going, but we can actually see over a perspective. We can see how our life could be unfold, how we can kind of navigate our life. And then we can see it as a pilgrimage rather than a prison sentence, right? Rather than being locked into this matter and, locked into the misery of samsara, that we can see samsara as something quite different. We can see it as something which has hidden gold if we just know how to extract it.
Yeah. And some of the ways that you go about that in the book, I felt were really profound. Like, there's a number of prayers that you have like included in here. And
yes.
I mean, I don't know if these are like, you've composed these yourself. I believe so.
Yes. Yeah. Those are all self-composed prayers. Those were prayers that I would use personally, but I would often use in group settings and then in private settings. I wanted them to be things that, like a little flame that someone could take and place in their consciousness and place in their home, and they could use it anywhere, wherever they are, and keep going back to it to kind of not only awaken their awareness, but also give them guidance, direction, a sense of calmness. Um, with
Yeah,
what we, when that's a key part of that book is it's almost like a type of prayer book, essentially.
completely. And I feel like that your prayers are so beautiful and really profoundly written. And I noticed in doing these practices that, part of it is just kind of like reading the words out loud and like feeling the emotions that are drawn forth from this sort of the the felt images that you're invoking through your
Yes.
words. But then it was undeniable where it kind of like led seamlessly into a sort of silence of everything where I don't know. At that point, I don't really know what was going on. Like it just draws you into this like very profound space. And I found that happen pretty much consistently, like reading the book and doing these prayers. So I don't know if you want
Oh,
to
that's
talk about that, but
yeah. No, that's beautiful to hear. I mean, sometimes I refer to that as when we can use prayers like that, or if we can create a certain kind of resonance through writing and through intention, that it can help. It's like it helps us. It almost draws us into the orbit of the Atman, the orbit of the self with a capital S. And then that's a very, as we move into that orbit, it starts to shift and change us. And that Atman, that inner flame, is always there. That's one of the key, incredibly key, important idea that I always remind people, at least from my perspective as a Hindu or a practitioner of Sanatana Dharma. There's different ways you could rephrase that. Is that this concept of the soul or the Atman? It's already perfect. It doesn't need to be healed. It's
right.
not something it's a very nuanced discussion. But I thought about this even this morning. I was looking at a textbook, um, a nursing textbook, a medical textbook, and they were talking about healing the body and healing the soul. And I knew what they meant. I knew what they were saying, but I instantly thought, well, that's such an interesting title that we would never say that in Hinduism. We would never say that the soul is already perfect. The Atman is perfect. It doesn't. It's a realm that doesn't need to be healed. It doesn't need to be retrieved. It doesn't need to be anything. It's eternal. It's there. And so as we get closer to that, we have to use the very funny directional concepts, right? As we get closer, the
Yeah.
orbit, but it's everywhere. It's like it's art, but we have to use these concepts, these linguistic games, to discuss it. But as we get closer to that flame, the flame is a beautiful metaphor for that. We can feel it, we can sense it, and it's literally who we are. It's our eternal presence. And so sometimes when you even get even close to that, or you get a resonance of that, it literally will take you out of mundane time and space. And that in and of itself is very healing. It can be unsettling for some, but it's typically incredibly healing. I often like to refer to how Ramana Maharshi would say, he would refer to it as periodic dips in the ocean of the heart.
That's beautiful.
And he would say it's hard to sustain that, but if you keep working with that, it can happen. There's all these limbs of yoga. And so he would say, you can either use this, or you can use this limb, or you can use that. He was depends on the person, depends on what we would say, depends on the adhikara, but it also just depends on, who they are, where they are, in their life. And as you get there, it definitely shifts things, and we should feel that. And so I'm glad to
Yeah.
hear you felt that. It is a type of perception and type of resonance, and it's a different type of environment.
Yeah. It really is. I have to say, I don't know. I think we already kind of talked about this, but the way these are like pretty, I mean, I don't want to say it's like not profound. It's completely profound, but they're very simple, straightforward practices and ideas. And um, I feel like I'm just as guilty of this as anybody, of this like idea that somehow the more complex, more esoteric, more
Sure.
involved teachings or practices are like somehow higher or like better or
Hmm.
mean more. But then I
Hmm.
come back and I read your book and it was like, no, no, it's actually the things that work and the things that like this that work without, I don't want to say without effort, but it feels almost effortless.
Yeah.
And
No, I'm.
yeah, it's just really shocking on one level, but also like it's incredibly like it's just present right there with like the entirety of, like you said, like the self is a capital S and it like draws you right in. So I feel like this idea of we like losing the forest for this individual trees and we just miss it.
No, I really appreciate that feedback, and I sometimes, you know, I often think of this. When we think of samsara, and we think of this embodiment, and whether we want to call samsara Maya, I mean, they're intimately connected. Is what essentially happens is this like limitless complications, right? Everything it has this tendency to get complicated and complicated, and we can see this on an esoteric level, and we can see this on literally a mundane level, where we think we have phrases like "there's too much red tape" or "there's too much this," and we can see that oftentimes the more things that too many cooks in the kitchen, too many moving parts. We have all these kind of colloquial phrases, and I think essentially in spirituality, it can be very complex because reality can be complex, much like anyone who takes the time to like truly study quantum physics. You can see it's incredibly complex, but then we can, anyone who studies Newtonian physics sees that actually it's quite simple. But it's not one or the other. They're intermingling, they're existing together. But I think that the concept of simplicity and alchemy are very important for people to understand that there is a distillation process, and that is our digestion of something, our perception of something is a distillation down to something very simple. It should go down to something. It doesn't mean that we have to have something incredibly complex to understand. And this was really influenced by my study of the Vedas and the Upanishads and the Bhagavad Gita and the tantric texts, because you can trace back, as you trace back through time, like for just to use a simple example, we can say like the Bhagavad Gita, they often refer to it as, they would say things like the ghee of the Vedas, right? It's like this distillation, like they took all this information and they distilled it down into one thing. And it's very easy to read. It's very simple to read, but it's incredibly provocative. But then if once you go back, then you can go to the Upanishads, and then you read the Upanishads, and it's also very simple, but it's a very evocative language. Right? It's very layered, and depending on how you read it, and particularly in particular when we're talking about Sanskrit, because the Sanskrit words can have 4 to 5 different meanings depending on where they are. It's quite basic. We
Mm.
hear that and we think that, oh, that means it's going to be this huge tome, right? But think of sutra literature. Sutra literature was very simple. It was very pithy, but it was meant to evoke something in the awareness of the consciousness. Now, that could also be reflected in something as simple, or not as simple, but as complex as like Zen, or even esoteric Shingon, Japanese Buddhism, and they would have more pithy type things. I like to refer to them as they're pregnant with possibility. They're like a resonant pregnancy that sits there and just waits for you to consume it, and they can work its way in yourself. And so I think that is something that I think we always have to remember. Complicating something doesn't always make it better. Um, and,
So
and,
true.
and, it's, and in spiritual practice, we need to constantly remind ourselves that complexity does not always mean better. And it doesn't mean that everything becomes simplified down to this problem. That's not what we're talking about at all. In many ways, the simple things are the hardest things to grasp. The things we tend to commonly miss, or the things we take for granted. Much like, and so that's something. Even with the concept of our life as a pilgrimage, there's so many simple things that happen along that pilgrimage that we could miss if we weren't paying attention in there. And just like our life, we can miss things. I know when we lose them, we look back and go, oh, I should have appreciated that more. Oh, I missed that. Oh, I wasn't taking advantage of that. And we don't have to live with, paranoia and regret. But hopefully, as we discuss these ideas, we ponder these ideas, it starts to kind of sharpen our perception. It starts to help that flame burn a little bit more lucid and clear so that we can see things for what they are, you
Yeah,
know.
I feel like this idea of simplicity that you're talking about here is directly connected with like the way that we live our own life. And in a
Yes.
like as if we want to be a spiritual practitioner, the, the most effective way to do that is to live like a simple, uncomplicated,
Yes.
balanced life. You actually write about this in your book. And if you don't mind, I just want to read this paragraph here because I found it
Oh,
to be
please. Thank you.
incredibly important. You write, the concept of balance and its relation to perceptual awareness is paramount in spiritual evolution. Life is filled with nuance, ambiguity, contradiction, and ephemerality. Yoga psychology speaks often of the limited potential of the senses, or indriyas. We cannot always believe what we see, yet often we are centered in a limited viewpoint, enveloped by the maya of the ego and refracted light of our senses. The faulty nature of the delusional senses tends to manufacture fear, paranoia, anxiety, and malaise. Over time, these mind states drain the vitality from the nervous system, mirroring the negative feedback loops of samsara. The lunar nature of the mind waxes and wanes as it navigates the waters of life. One day satisfied, one day dissatisfied, one day happy, one day frightened. The solar radiance of the Atman clears away the fog of Maya, connecting the awareness to an unlimited source of spiritual nourishment, which the world cannot erode or dampen. This source of nourishment spills into the realm of mundane time from a space outside of time, a dimension of eternity, which occasionally bleeds into reality at unpredictable moments. The more often we come into contact with the mysterious dawning solar radiance, the more we can begin to ground ourselves in a state of mind unbothered by the apparent egoic dichotomies of life and are able to see the paradox and ambiguity as glimpses of the eternal, which can offer important lessons for karmic unfoldment. One of the goals of yoga is to transform the senses into doorways of perception able to experience the divine flame. An important facet of this transformation is the cultivation of listening. We just have to be quiet. The inner chaos of expectation and worry, and the outer chaos of artificial stimulation drowns out the haunting resonance of Agni, which vibrates within every cell of our body, every cell of nature. As one begins to listen, all the senses begin to subtly shift into a mode of perception which begins to see the glimpses of divine light in everyday moments, taste mysterious sweetness in the simplest experiences, sense the presence of a silent witness in the passing of time. The practice of pratyahara is the catalyst. Fields of the eternal begin to emerge. I mean, that's not only beautiful, it's true, and it's so well written and sublimely expressed that like it That's like the most concise paragraph on that I've ever read. And
Oh, thank you.
I want to like plaster it all over the internet.
Then thank you so much. Yeah, I mean that's the thing is that oftentimes this concept of ego is thrown around, but really ego is just a type of perception of reality. It's how we're seeing reality, and it's very it can become so narrow. And as that happens, then we lose so much joy, we lose so much opportunity for growth, and that's where we start to. It's almost like a refraction of light. We start to miss the ambiguity, we miss the nuance, and when that happens, um, we lose so much. And we also another thing in there we lose humor. As you if we lose a sense of humor, you'll notice that as cultures start to become more like fanatical or kind of when there's lots of like caustic fighting, that even humor is lost, and they'll start attacking humor. There's no way to laugh. There's no way to have anything. And then when that happens, everything you really get a lot of sickness. So even within a very intense spiritual practice, we have to have a sense of humor because it's like a cosmic comedy. When you look at your life at times and understanding this, and things won't always make sense the way our ego wants or rather how we want it to make sense, or how rather society tells us it should make sense, or our parents or the school or even a religion.
Yeah.
There's many, even a religion, it'll have certain, you can see that very rules, but those are so rigid, and we can see that life is not always up to get lied that way. And so I think we have to always work with that. And that primordial concept of the flame, it just goes beyond all these sectarian disputes, goes beyond all these kind of limitations. And it's more of a type of primordial power. And that exists literally on the cellular level, and it exists on a cosmic level, and exists on every level. It's everywhere. And of course, that was influenced by my studies of the Vedas, where Agni was the primordial deity. Remember, Agni is the deity that kind of carries everything up. It carries everything out. And then, originally it was how we left the world. That we were bodies were burned and we left to go into the next journey with
Right.
flame. Of course we still can, but not everybody might choose that way. But originally that was the concept of it. It was a doorway, but it was also a level of being kind of viewing reality. And so that's something where we have to always remind ourselves, and that's not complicated. That's such a primordial thing as the flame and the fire.
Yeah, I feel like this, and part of the reason I react so strongly to your words on this topic is because I feel like I've lived this and I am living this.
Mm-hmm.
And like I can see just from the past, sort of like if I see my own life through the lens of like sort of this mythopoetic spiritual journey, that this pilgrimage, if you will.
Right.
Then I can see how, as I deepened my spiritual practice and got closer and closer to approaching like a much more significant stage of that, I got sicker and sicker and more
Yes.
paranoid and more anxious
Right.
and more fearful. And that still happens to me. I still get caught in those loops. I mean, thankfully, not nearly to the extent, but I mean, there were plenty of days where I felt so sick or in so much pain that I was like, I don't know how much longer I can do this. Like, this is not really sustainable. Like, it's just not viable anymore.
Right.
But then if I look at it through that lens, I can see, well, like you're approaching like serious spiritual practice. Like you're really so you need to like go through this, I don't know, purification, maybe. I don't what would you call that?
Yeah, I mean, it is a type of purification, a type of almost like filter where we can, kind of burn away things that aren't important and extract some kind of essence, or we would say a rasa, a taste of something. That's what we really want to extract. And that concept of the pilgrimage, of time is, I mean, our whole karmic unfoldment is in this concept of, linear time. We perceive it as that way, but there's a part of ourself which is existing outside of linear time. And I often refer to this is, when people don't see this trajectory of their life, right? They don't see a trajectory, which I could refer to as a pilgrimage, or, I would say the hidden pilgrimage, because a lot of people don't see it. They feel as if they don't have a map to that, but there is an inner map to that, an inner guide. But if we don't see that, then we can often get that existential malaise. We can get the sense of being lost. There's no sense of direction. And then also, too, we have this unique relationship with the past. And that's where I often refer to the cancer of regret, and that people who have regret, um, in their lives, it's very unhealthy. It causes a lot of stagnation, and it causes more Maya. And that we could, to navigate the streams of time in our life, we can often say it's very important from a tantric perspective to not have regret and to practice forgiveness. Because if we have regret and we do not forgive, we harden the pranic body. And then when that happens, you can almost imagine the more we harden the pranic body, our eyes just get shut. It closes. And so it's almost like, when you hear those stories about people saying they were in a stressful situation, they got tunnel vision, right? And it's like, that's what happens, but we don't even realize it's happening. It's just our vision's getting taken away. And then our perception of reality is becoming smaller, smaller, more myopic, more myopic, more myopic. We could say myopic slash egoic slash selfish with a small s.
Yeah.
So that's even what I brought up, that concept of Gnostic nostalgia, was this idea of us being able to look back into our past without regret, to see a journey, a trajectory that led us to where we are, that led us to where, and that includes good and bad. And then where the potential lies into the future, and how we exist in this eternal moment of now. And that's all related. It all is this kind of intermingling, and so much of it is related to our personal perception, how we feel about that. Um, and,
Yeah,
and
that's so true. I have some things I want to say about this. The first would be like the way our, like the way that we are, like affecting so much how we interpret what we perceive. And so this is where I feel like this whole idea of you, like, and trying to like hold that in primacy is important, because like if we just go with what we know and how we've always been, you automatically arise as like me in the world of stuff, and all of it's
right,
separate and individuated, and like
right,
we can say, oh, I know it's not self-existent, but like it feels that way. It feels
yeah,
completely separate. But then you have those moments like we talked about where you kind of like are approaching like the self or the Atman or
hmm
reality, whatever you want to call it. And it couldn't be any clearer. Like that self-concerned, egoic kind of interpretation of perception is mistaken.
right,
And there's no way we could have arrived to that moment of realization without all of the wonderful blessings and
yes,
grace, and also all of the suffering, hardship, grief, pain. Like
yeah,
it was all one thing that brought us to the no thing, or the one thing. It
yep,
couldn't be otherwise. And in those
yes,
moments, it all feels like, oh, it's fine. Of course, it always has
right,
been. But
right,
then we slip, and we're right back into the fear and the paranoia and the anxiety and the malaise and the sickness. And so you're right. You have to like kind of like keep immersing yourself into this stream or ocean or what have you,
Yeah.
because
Yeah. And it's, and if you know this, it's, then you can constantly kind of reorient yourself. You can re-gauge yourself. And this is often also too, like when, even like we spoke about Ramana Maharshi, they often ask him, like, of all the limbs of yoga, which limb was most important. People were always going to Ramana and asking like real extreme dramatic questions. But I remember this one, he said, of all the limbs of yoga, the most important thing was association. And he threw a lot of people off. And what he meant by that was, whoever you surround yourself is going to determine your personal environment. So that's kind of what we're talking about. Like, are you going to surround yourself with things that will remind you of the importance of life or who you are or what the trajectory is? Or will you have things around you that will continue to keep pulling you out into Maya or keep pulling you out into the mirage? And this does not mean living a life of like drudgery or living in a cave. Absolutely not. We have, we all have parabdha karma where we engage with the world and we can help individual beings. Matter of fact, the majority of us, that's why we're here, is to do that, to help other people with suffering. And that's how we learn and that's how we coexist. And so it does not mean pulling away from the world. It does not mean, it means a more direct engagement with the world where we're okay with engaging. We don't seek to escape from this. We matter of fact, want to face it head on, just like we don't want to turn off our emotions. I mean, that's something, as a medical practitioner, this is something I always see. Most people want to turn off their emotions, right? That's what we'll even see with, like prescription antidepressants, right? What do people say? They'll say things like, well, I'm not happy or I'm not sad. But I'm not necessarily happy. I just don't feel much of anything. And it's like this flat line, right? And then sometimes they'll say things like, well, it's better than feeling bad, kind of, I guess. It's kind of, and it's just a strange thing. So we have to, if we turn off that wavelength, we're turning off opportunities to experience reality. And so everyone is different. Some people might have to go to a cave somewhere, travel somewhere, and that might be their specific parabdha karma. But in general, I always try to tell people it doesn't always mean that there is just some kind of, escapism from the world. If anything, we need people more engaged with the world. We don't need to escape. We need people to be more in communication, more helping others, more engaging with that. And that is where we find a true type of alchemy. But while that's going on, there's also an inner journey as well too. And so
yeah,
that's that. It's a mystery, but it's something that is waiting there for us to look at it. It's not. It's waiting there to be discovered.
it's beautiful. I've known you a long time, relatively
Yeah.
speaking. I've read all your books. I've talked to you a lot. Like, I have a certain degree of trust and faith in you that's been proven out over time and through deeds.
Right. Right.
And so I
Um,
don't have any doubt that if someone authentically reads and engages with your book, they're going to get pretty profound results from it.
thank you. And I like that way you said engage, because this book is meant to be engaged with, to be use the prayers, carry it with you somewhere, think about it, read it, because each time they read it, they're going to find something different. That's the idea.
No,
It
I think
becomes alive.
especially that what you say, like, and I know it may be the least of it, but carrying it with you, like reading it, there's a physical like beauty and real craftsmanship to the book itself, of course. But I
Sure.
feel like
Sure.
the words, your intention, reading it, and then like holding it with you, because I feel like it's not like a normal book where you're just conveying information. It's much more
Right.
than that. It becomes like
Right.
a sacred object in and of itself, and it like will hold and transmit the power of the prayers, like,
Yes.
and
Yes.
as a physical object, it has a certain spiritual power in that way.
It becomes like, I like to say, it becomes like an Agni attractor.
Yes.
It becomes a type of thing which will, attract Agni, mirror Agni back to you. And that's always very personal. So that's the beauty of it. So
Yeah. It's wonderful. Really well done. I can't
thank you.
recommend
Thank
this
you.
book highly enough. I feel like it's been a long time since I've been so touched by a book like that. It's just really wonderful. So great
I'm
job.
so,
Really,
I'm so honored.
I'm really
Thank you so
proud of
much.
you.
I
It's
really
tremendous.
appreciate that.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Well, this has been wonderful. I just want to thank you, and let me stop the recording here. Unless you have anything else you want to add.
No, no, that was beautiful. Thank you for your beautiful insights. You had so many really powerful analogies and
Thank you.
ways of thinking about it, which reflects your engagement with your practice. And that's always so beautiful.